It's so nice to be here today in Belgrade at Bitef with Maska, and also four of our authors of this new Maska edition are here with us today. So I'm really happy that this can also be a little gathering for all of us that were dealing with the concept of Yugofuturism for the past couple of months at least. Maybe just first to introduce them, on my furthest from me is Natalija Majsova. Natalija Majsova is a culturologist working as a not assistant, which was assistant and not associate professor, which was my mistake in the brochure. So as an assistant professor at the department and chair of cultural studies at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Ljubljana. And her research interests include theory of culture and film studies, post-Soviet cultural studies, memory studies, and science fiction. So very convenient for the topics that we'll be talking about today, I think. Okay, next is Fazekaš. Fazekaš introduced herself as someone who's currently procrastinating work on her PhD dissertation, and her field of interest is mostly psychoanalysis, read as an anti-humanist proto-queer theory, gender studies, and contemporary art practices. She's working as a freelance author, and she's regularly publishing critical text reviews and essays about performing arts, literature, and pop culture. She's from Zagreb. Next is Smole. Smole is a philosopher and sociologist, and he regularly cooperates with the Radio Student Culture Editorial and Megaphone, internet platform, Medium, and he's also a publicist, critic, and author of radio plays. And last but not least is Vera Mevorah. She's an art and media theorist and digital society researcher at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory at the University of Belgrade. So Natalija comes from Ljubljana, we have a participant from Zagreb, Simon is from Ljubljana also, but has also some Belgrade roots, I guess. And we have also one participant from Belgrade. But the entire collection of our authors is even broader in Maska. So there's 14 articles in the Yugofuturism edition. Maybe I will just read them out for you. So we have Asia Bakic's article, Yugofuturism as a Trap. Then Moani Sinanovic, an author from Slovenia. 10 Images of Yugofuturism, which is more of a fiction text. Then Maja Marjanovic wrote about Yugofuturistic performing of history. She should be here with us today, but she had to unfortunately excuse herself. And then we have Dinko Krejko's short story. We have Goran Ferčec with also a kind of a play on Hotel Haludovo in Krk island in Croatia. We have Kalija Dimitrova, Yugofuturism, Legacy and Imagination, which is a really nice text, also autobiographical text on feminism in Yugoslavia and today. And we have Jasmina Šepetavac, who's writing from a queer perspective and is searching for a kind of a queer history in Yugoslavia, and she finds it in the videos of Borgesia. And then we have also Jasmina Založnik's text, which is affirming the somatic practices, and she's also in a text which is a kind of a hybrid between theory and fiction. She's writing about future times when dance is prohibited. And then we have Maja Pelević, which is well known in this context with her play Catwalk Factory. So I didn't talk much about what you wrote about, because I think that we will do this together now. Maybe before we do that, I would just like to say a few words on how we started at Maska to tackle Yugofuturism and why Yugofuturism. So we're dealing with this concept for the last 2 years, and we started, it was maybe a bit of an error or mistake how we started, because we've named an issue 200 CC. We had 3 200 issues, but the last one, the C version, was called Yugofuturism. But there was no futurism there yet. We just named it like that because it was a compilation of texts from our conference on our anniversary. So it was 100 years from the first edition of Maska, and we had this conference called Precarity or Self-Management. So we were dealing there more with the past and the present, and not so much about the future. But we named it like that, the issue, because it was something that it was a kind of a thing that was left for us to still do. It was we preconditioned it somehow. There, the authors were writing and participated in the conference in this 200th issue, which were collaborators of Maska for a very long time. These people whom a lot of you are familiar with, because they're still very much authorities in the performing arts scene. They all kind of come from the Balkans, from the 3 platforms, 3 journals, Maska, Teorija koja hoda, and Frakcija. So these 3 issues, so these 3 journals were then, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, they were really big, and the theory they produced was something to export to the West even. It was really very important things happened from these editions. But now only Maska kind of lingers on, so it's kind of a legacy for us, and but we want to still do something else from it. So not to only be in this debt to this generation that created something. We are now the new generation, and we want to take Maska somewhere further, or I don't know, further or nearer or whatever. But we want to take it in our own way. And also, I have to say that the networks that Maska had with the former director, they are not inherited. They are not brought to this new generation. So I think this is also our way of establishing new platforms, new networks of connecting. So this is really quickly how we started to deal with Yugofuturism. So it was a lot of dealing about the switch of generations and how these generations maybe don't necessarily see things the way these generations that were before us saw things. And I really think that very, very much what is in common for the feeling of this, I don't know how to call it, a millennial or generation, is the feeling of losing a perspective, a feeling of not having a future, feeling how to deal with continuous crisis and how to find a way to deal with that. So this was maybe also our entry point of dealing with Yugofuturism. So this no future feeling was for us also something to begin with, but we knew that we wanted to maybe to weave these new networks with the former region of the former common country, and so by doing that, it would have to be a new thing. It can't be inherited, as I said before. And maybe this is also why we're talking in English today, because this generation does not have this natural way of communicating between ourselves, because there's no more common language. Maybe the most common language now is English. English is, of course, the language of the international tenders, the language of power, and this is the only language that we have. Of course, we can find a new language, a new common language, but we will have to invent one. It can't just be the one that we stopped listening to when we stopped listening to each other. So I think that maybe this is one of such opportunities when we can start inventing it, and we can borrow English to do so for now. Okay, enough from my side about the broader context which brought us to the topic of Yugofuturism. Sorry. And now maybe we can start with the contents of this issue, which is really special to me. It's a special edition. We edited it together with my colleague Pia Brezavškek, which also can't be here with us today, unfortunately, but is present in the issue very much. So yes, maybe I will start from my first side again, if you agree, with Natalia's piece in Maska. So Natalija, of course, we won't go through the whole points in the article, but there's really a passage where you beautifully talk about nostalgia, which is maybe something that in the last decades is not anymore a way which people deal with the former Yugoslavia in the region. So maybe what's the evolution of the ways we deal with Yugoslavia in the last years?
Thank you, Pia, for the question and for the invitation to this roundtable, and for to contribute to this to the volume of this journal issue. The question of how Yugoslavia is dealt with, I guess, in different types of narratives, in different contexts, is of course super broad. I think that by now we all realize that different discourses paint different pictures of Yugoslavia, of our common past, for different publics. Why I thought it was important to include a reflection on nostalgic discourses in my short article for Maska was because, to me, many ideas that are at the heart of Yugofuturism as a way of thinking the future from this common context, where people do have a shared history, a shared past. Many of these concepts kind of resonate or tend to evoke nostalgic sentiment as well. So for me, it was important to think through the ways in which scholarship, so historians, political scientists, cultural studies scholars, scholars in the humanities, how people have dealt with this sentiment, related to the Yugoslav past over the past few decades. And what transpires is that in scholarship, Yugo-nostalgia became a very important kind of wave of scholarship around a decade or a decade and a half ago. And of course it resonates with other nostalgias for socialism, which at that time, so around 10 or 15 years ago, became a very powerful vehicle for people to express themselves about parts of different socialist experiences that were kind of muted for a decade or two earlier, when all of these experiences were kind of subsumed under the indicator, under the signifier of, well, totalitarian regimes, regimes that were failures, that haven't really brought us anything good, regimes that needed to be transitioned from into a new context. Scholars studying Yugo-nostalgia, so studying how people actually felt about their past as opposed to what politicians and other people who create normative discourses thought they should be feeling. So this discourse empowered a whole wave of scholars in different disciplines, and it really enriched the pool of cultural memory studies. So all of a sudden, memories related to, for example, the breakup of Yugoslavia, the transition and so on, they got a different kind of hue. I mean, instead of this bleak kind of gray, we could also now look through pink glasses. And I'm not saying it in a derogatory way. I think it was a really important stage in scholarly discourses. So. The issue is, however, that after around a decade of people thinking about the ways in which nostalgia can be an empowering sentiment, reconnecting people to the positive memories that they have of their own past, after a decade or so of this kind of discourse, it now seems to nevertheless present a certain bottleneck, right? So is the past, are these subjective positive memories the only positive direction and trajectory that we have? So is returning to the past the only thing that we are capable of doing now in this space? Or can we perhaps start thinking and imagining new futures? So to me, discourses on Yugo-nostalgia, on nostalgie, on nostalgias for socialism, and especially those scholars who have stipulated the possible emancipatory impetus at the core of some of these nostalgias. So scholars who have not focused so much on how nostalgia is a way to commodify our past, but how nostalgia is a way to imagine, an anchor for yourself in the past that will allow you to look into the future. To me, it's an important part or an important stepping stone towards futurisms in this region.
Thank you, Natalia. And I think that nostalgia is definitely not something that we were clinging to in this Maska. In this edition, I think that our view of Yugo-futurism is kind of wanting to seize this retro moment of a time in the past where there was still a possible future, and we know it's impossible to just reclaim it, but we love this moment of it, so we love the retro moment when this was possible, but we know it's a fiction. So we're building this little fiction, and maybe it's interesting to me how this can be done when we also when the errors and the failures of it are included, So I think that Fazekaš did this really beautifully in her article. So maybe my question would be for you to start somewhere. Who are the ecstatic losers? Maybe this can be the start.
Okay, so I laughed because I knew she was coming for me when she said failure. Well, basically just to maybe give a background to the text that I wrote called What Depressed Utopias and Ecstatic Losers, something like that. So Rock and Pia got in touch with me and asked me to write a text, and I really wanted to, and it sounded really sexy to write about Yugofuturism, so I said, of course, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Also, I don't really turn down jobs because I am a freelance writer, so can't really afford to. But I was really honestly very excited about trying to think about like what Yugofuturism can be and how I can engage with it. The problem was that once I started trying to write the article, I realized that I'm the worst possible person to be engaging with this topic. I did not know where to start. Also, the idea was that I would write about Yugofuturism in connection to dance, contemporary dance, because I also write about dance art. But again, I didn't like every segment of what they wanted me to do. Felt like I couldn't really do it well. So I felt really completely inadequate, which is not a new feeling for me. Because trying to earn a living writing means you really have to write a lot and take any job you can, which means that you can't really be super informed about everything you're doing. And you really have to embrace the fact that you are probably going to make mistakes, you're probably going to fail. A lot of the things that you're going to write are going to come back to haunt you, and they're going to be, they're just going to be inadequate. And you have to live with it somehow, and maybe embrace it, and maybe try to, build on these feelings, and be accepting of these feelings. Also, while I'm procrastinating my PhD, I've kind of drifted away from kind of traditional academic kind of discourse. I can't really connect to writing pseudo-objectively. I don't want to. I'm not excited by that kind of discourse anymore. So all of these things combined, and I was really trying hard. I really wanted to do a good job, and I kept going into the text and hitting a wall. So what happened was this kind of really weird collage text, a patchwork of quotes and thoughts and autofictions, just trying to somehow capture this feeling of both trying and failing, and this feeling that I had, like, of being fragmented, of trying to bring things together that don't necessarily click. Because as I was doing this and thinking, this is going to be so horrible, you're gonna hate me so much, I felt like there was something really, really right about writing about Yugoslavia and Yugofuturism and failing. It seemed to make sense, of course. And then thinking also about my own identity and who I am and where I'm from and where my family's from, and this whole background that I don't like to think about. I felt, we're totally losers. Like we fucked everything up. Sorry, but we have like such a tradition of failing, of trying and failing and falling apart and having like really bad breakups and choosing wrong things, wrong people. So then it kind of made sense. Like things started to come together while falling apart in my text. Yeah, and so yeah, and sorry. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I was thinking about my own feelings of inadequacy, which led me to thinking about failure, which is a topic I think a lot about, which brought me to a book called The Queer Art of Failure by Jack Halberstam, which contemplates the future and has this like really beautiful quote when he asks what comes after hope. Which I felt was also fit really nicely with this topic and with who I am or who we are maybe. And I was listening to a podcast these days, an E-Flux podcast with Tony Wood, who is a writer on science fiction. And he quoted Kafka saying, talking to Max Brod, and Max Brod asked him, so you think there's no hope? And Kafka apparently answered, oh, there's plenty of hope, just not for us. Which was also very interesting, and yeah, I kind of lost my trail of thought. I swear I had it, but those were kind of the keywords I was circling while writing the text.
Yes, when you said that you were not really, you didn't feel adequate for writing about this text, I think that exactly because of it you were the perfect candidate for it, because you came up with such a beautiful text that is compiling so many thoughts that are like really like coming from the sky, but they're so ingenious and they're exactly talking about this common feeling I think that we wanted to bring up in this issue, because you know yeah, and this text I really find it the most Yugo-futuristic in the form, in the way how it is written, because I don't know if you agree, but when you speak about the inadequacy also of the academic writing, I think that for the topic of Yugo-futurism, if we really want to embrace it, we really have to also find a form for it. I'm not saying that it's wrong to write academically about it. Sure, I think it's very important, but if we think that making things like making utopia, you know, making futurism, it's inventing things, it's creating things, it's creation, and I think this text really does this in a very beautiful way.
Thank you.
So read it, please. Yes, maybe we can proceed and then go back to all of you. Simon, you were also doing an innovative way of compiling different voices for this topic. So you invited 5 people and you compiled an interview from all these voices. And I have to ask you, what was your process of selecting these particular people, and what did you find out about Yugo-futurism when talking with them?
So I'm actually not an author, I'm just a vehicle for other authors. So selection was, maybe at first sight it seems like it was picked, the people were picked randomly, but at the end they were the perfect representatives of different aspects or point of views, because some of them have this immediate experience of Yugoslavia, but the odd guy out was Bon Park, who's actually from Korea. He's German, he lives in Germany, but he's from Korea. He's a theater director, and he's younger. I think he's a little bit over 30. So he doesn't have the immediate experience of living in Yugoslavia. He's just he's experiencing Yugoslavia through stories, through narration, through art, through literature. So this is the special flavor to the interview. The others all have different perspectives because they work in different fields, and they have a unique approach to the experience of Yugoslavia. So one is a professor who is famous in these parts of region, Darko Subin. He also deals with science fiction and so on. The others are critics, writers, authors, and they have different special, unique perspective on a topic. So I picked them because I didn't know how to approach this topic. I didn't know how to write about it, what to say. The first thought was Yugoslavia is that the dissolvent Yugoslavia has ended. So what is the purpose of talking about future? Why talk about future? Because the other intention of the video is to extract from them which words, which terms they will use when answering the question about Yugofuturism. And the result was, I think, they all use the words of utopia. The words they use is memory. The words they use is past, dealing with history, appropriation of history, institutional memory, and so on and so on. It's the framework that I was anticipating that will be that will emerge in this entry, and it is. So this was interesting for me to see how they respond to my questions, which have some obvious intentions or forced narrations that I was forcing in the questions to see the responses.
Maybe just to return to Bon Park, because for me this was also the most interesting pick, because he did a performance called Yugoslavia, which is for him kind of this utopic place where it's a state where everything is the best that it can be. And for me this was really interesting. Why such a projection, you know? And coming also from a younger director of our generation that has just an interest on these parts but has no immediate experience. So this was really fascinating for me.
It's interesting, he received many awards for this piece, theater piece. Yes, he chose his idea. His main idea was to just take essence of this romantic idea of Yugoslavia, of this non-place, just of imaginary place where everything is ideal, all these achievements of and this beautiful legacy of social Yugoslavia was. And he was just reading about that. He was watching films of Kusturica and so on. He was just so naive, but in this naivety he succeeded in some way. In this perspective he had of Yugoslavia. This is just one of perspectives the Westerns can't have of Yugoslavia. He just made theater piece out of it. But it's funny because he had the actors were all from Yugoslavia. Some of them were even older. So he used their stories. He was talking with them, and then he was just using their stories. He stripped their stories of historical facts. He just used the substrate of this romantic idea of Yugoslavia, and he made a display. So yeah.
Yeah, so one is the romantic idea of Yugoslavia, and then of course there's these facts, the nationalism, which is the fact of this post-Yugoslavic national states, and of course the tragic breakup with victims and so on. So maybe if we proceed now to a kind of a other place, which is not a romantic place, so the internets. Vera,
It is a very romantic place.
yes, it can be, I agree, but it can be many things. It can bring up also the worst in us, not only the best, as Yugoslavia did. So maybe I would just like to say that Vera was also present in our other Jugofuturist event in Ljubljana at Iskra Delta, together with another author, which is published here, Dinko Kreho. So she's now, she elaborated this article a bit further from that event. And I wanted to ask you, Vera, why did you choose to research so much on this mimetic culture in the relation to Jugofuturism?
Thank you, Pia. And I just also want to say, like, for me, it's very interesting to be talking about, specifically about my piece, which has to do with ex or post-Yugoslav digital culture as it presents in meme communities, but also it's something that's happening in parallel of being part of this process of thinking about Jugofuturism. I think they happen in parallel, they're not really, and I'm really happy to be here and to continue this. Actually, the idea for my piece came out of brainstorming with the editor of, other editor of this Maska issue, Rok Pozovića. And aside from my initial excitement, which was actually a very empty excitement about this word, Jugofuturism, I think similar to what Anna experienced, there was Rok on the other side, who said to me, you know, I found an article of yours about turbofolk online, and I'm really interested about this whole like trash and kitsch culture that we can see like just popping all over ex-Yugoslav countries and just like having their own lives and also disseminating discourses transformed in many ways which have to do with Yugoslavia. So we would like writing about this and Jugofuturism. So, like on one side there was this challenge. I really loved Rok's idea. I couldn't think of actually a better approach at that point. When you hear a great idea, you abandon everything else. But also in parallel, I thought about Jugofuturism as such. So I think that my piece, because it draws also on this contemporary digital culture and digital form of communication through memes, it also dealt with one very Yugoslav, let's say, avant-garde artistic strategy called subversive affirmation or over-identification strategy that we connect to Neue Slovenische Kunst and Leibach art collectives, and which essentially deal with using, over-identifying with very problematic totalitarian ideology, imagery norms. And how actually we can see and find these kind of strategies in digital culture.
Yes, it's really interesting how these maybe even avant-garde procedures are now widely used on the internet chats and on internet, on social media and so on. But you draw a really important line in between what is subversive information and maybe what cannot be. So the subversive information has this, there's no irony in it, you go all the way in it, but if there's still irony, that's not subversive information. But for me, because now a lot of things happened in Slovenia, also regarding the Neue Slovenische Kunst and Irvin and so on. Those lines are really porous, and I'm not sure that this, not ironic use of subversion is not problematic. So I don't know if you all know what I'm talking about. We won't go into the details. I don't think we have the time. But I think that the internet really brought up, because if you're anonymous, you can do quite anything. But of course, artists have their names written after some strategies. Yeah.
I have maybe it's this very confusing day that was supposed to be like gray and fall-like and came like summer, that I want to turn this story around, because I did turn that theory around in my paper. So what I did was I realized that over-identifying practices online, and we're talking about here in terms of post-Yugoslav space about, and if you heard, it's called Serbia Strong meme. It's a very famous example because it produced another meme which is called Remove Kebab, which basically came to connote killing of Muslims. And it was something that was utilized by the alt-right movement, and Christchurch, New Zealand in 2010, the killer who live streamed his attack said that he was a part-time kebab removalist. So what Pia was talking about is this very, there are obviously very consequences to what content spreads online. But what I found, this outright appropriation of mimetic subversive affirmation or mimetic using of irony is just an access or a part of why it was so powerful, and why it was this video, which became a meme, had several million views on YouTube. So the question of researchers really important for them was, okay, there are really so many people spreading this hatred, believing in this hatred. And are we exporting our breakup of Yugoslavia hatred all over the world? But what I did through my research, which continued after this Maska issue, was realize that this kind of over-identification practices, so outright what they did, they put some hatred and they claimed it was irony, and in fact it was not irony, it was irony, irony with another layer of irony, which in truth was just broadcast as a truth. That the reason why these memes became popular and why they spread so much was because, not because of the lack of irony and the strength of the strategy, because it was always, the irony is the main player here. And the way the irony works is not hatred, it's not sarcasm, it's not using it as a weapon to degrade, but it's actually a very community building trope. It's something that creates its own chains. So the way that these, let's say, hateful or like problematic discourses tied to the breakup of Yugoslavia spread online were actually playing on irony. They were actually an expression of a community which is not artistic community, which is not scientific community, which had this need to express and to communicate to more meaning or their own layers of memory, of understanding of this heritage, and do it through playfulness, through irony. So what I realized is that even though it had an effect, we have this alt-right phenomenon. Essentially, alt-right would never have existed if there was not for so many people actually playing with irony with this kind of content. So reworking, in an essence, reworking this heritage in very interesting ways.
Also, Mani Sinanovic is in the end of his short fiction writing about these internet communities, like the Slav squat and so on. And I think that he's also really skeptical to this kind of futuristic projections of these communities. But they are still, as he says, they are fun, but they're, I don't know, that he really formulates it nicely, that it's like, maybe I should just read it because it's so nice, I'll find it.
Can I ask only one question, please?
Sure.
My name is Natalija. I'm a journalist from Daily News calling Blitz. please tell us in few sentences, what is Yugofuturism?
You know, my PhD professor, Miško Šuvaković, in the first lecture, we asked him, like, he asked the question, what is art? And we asked him, like, what is art? And he said, you know, if I answer this question, I'm going to lose my job. No, I'm kidding, but...
what is the most important for that?
I think that you should stick through this conference and the next one, and the way I understand it, this is working in progress. This is working through many problematic issues like nostalgia, like the fear of failure. Yugofuturism is something like which this issue is like pushing itself against and testing itself against, and it's something that excites us. It has possibilities, but it's something that is yet to be conceived.
So exactly we don't know what.
Yes, we're finding out through asking a lot of people about what it is, and it's more broadening the concept, not narrowing it down to one
I
sentence.
know what it was, but no, I don't know what
Yes,
it's going to be.
we're creating it through our common, doings. Maybe just to read this last sentence that Moanis points out, and he says like this: videos pop up on social networks and everyone laughs. Oh look, it's the lovable, slightly backward Slavs again, with their eccentric ideas and tribal oddities. And we are proud of that, us, the squatting Slavs, the always anticipated, momentarily realized, never lasting world avant-garde. Maybe this can be one definition, I don't know. I think that we still have some time. I would like to return to some more content. I think that really important aspect in a lot of the articles, I think that more than half of the articles is feminism. And it was really interesting because we didn't really say to the authors that they have to write something really feminist. But this popped out, and this popped out exactly with this notion of Yugofuturism. I think that 8 articles are really strongly feminist in their content. The first author, Asja Bakic, writes that for her, Yugofuturism is something that is not possible to recreate because this was a point in the past, and it was ended in '53 with the anti-fascist woman front. So this is a really interesting perspective. And then we have also Kalia Dimitrova, who writes through her own perspective or her autobiography. She also writes about Yugoslav women and her grandma being like this like most common Yugofuturist or Yugoslav woman, not Yugofuturist woman. And maybe Natalija, your article is also very much a feminist acknowledging article. Your case studies are Ana Vujanović and Marta Popevoda's work. Why did you focus on these works?
Well, to echo Anna, I also felt super excited by the topic and also wildly inadequate as a proposed writer. On the one hand, because I'd never experienced Yugoslavia. I was born in the Soviet Union. We'd emigrated to Slovenia when I was a little child. It was already Slovenia. So I had experienced reverberations of the breakup of Yugoslavia personally as a foreigner in a multicultural district of Ljubljana. Also then on a different level when I decided to focus my studies and my research in cultural studies and in comparing different phenomena in different post-socialist states. So for me, Yugofuturism was an intriguing starting point for thinking about parameters in this space that we have and that can allow us to move forward and to think about a future from a perspective that would not be dictated by actors such as the EU, the West, or whatever. To me, art is often a very important helper, aid, I guess, when trying to think things through. And when I was trying to find examples for what I wanted to articulate for this particular article, Marta Popovivoda and Anna Vujanović's work Marta Popovivoda as a film director, Anna Vujanović as a dramaturge, their work seemed to fit in very, very nicely with what I wanted to say, because it seems that, at least in Marta Popovivoda's case, her preoccupation with thinking through, working through the legacy of Yugoslavia and its breakup, and kind of trying to rethink your own position, what you as a young person or an early middle-aged person can do, what your outlook on life in this context, in this situation can be. This has been her preoccupation for over a decade now. And what I decided to do was trace some of her works. So first her documentary film, Yugoslavia, How Ideology Moved Our Collective Body, which got a very polarized, I guess, response in this region. But it's definitely, in film studies terminology, it's a memory film. So it's the use of different types of archival footage. She went through the archives of national television in Belgrade. She appropriated this imagery, she adopted her own perspective, and she voiced it through this narrative, which is fairly, it's sort of monotonous, so there isn't much emotion in the narrative. Some viewers describe the movie as difficult to watch because it's slow-paced and unemotional. Some people said that it was aiding collective forgetting because it wasn't portraying, Yugoslav history as such. But to me, what she did was she voiced and she performed a perspective of somebody, of a generation of the very, very last pioneers who then had to embrace, Belgrade during war, who had to embrace a history that they didn't really feel that they belonged to, who basically woke up as young adults in a world which was totally confusing, and they had to find their way through it. So her this first film was a way of positioning herself as this unreliable sort of narrator. And then she focused with Anna Vujanović, she created a theater performance, which was performed in Ljubljana at Mladinsko Gledalište, and it was entitled Landscapes of Revolution, where they basically tried to break up all the different mythologies surrounding the history of the Second World War, all these, very unilateral kind of mythologies about who was right and who was wrong, and they did so also through foregrounding women, female partisans whose history and whose stories had, to a large extent, been erased from these dominant narratives. And I thought that the performance was fascinating, also in terms of form, how it really played around with space and time and voices in a way that's difficult to just describe. Therefore, it was a theater performance. And then her third piece, Landscapes of Resistance, was actually a documentary that premiered around a year and a half ago, and which was based on 10 years of interviews that they'd conducted with Anna Vujanović's grandmother, who was a partisan. So they basically traced, her opinion, her view of the emancipatory, utopian, futuristic, if you want, momentum of the partisan struggle. And it's a very calm, peaceful kind of documentary, which contrasts the narrative, so these interviews with Sonia, the old partisan, with landscapes, and landscapes of today. So it's landscapes that used to be sites of partisan struggles, but now these are cracked walls. There is grass growing through concrete and so on. So it's very meditative. And what I found highly interesting and important was that this account was not just an attempt to recreate a personal history, but it was also counterpointed with Marta Popivoda's own reflections on how and what of this history can be used in today's circumstances, where she specifically is an artist living in Berlin. So, what are these utopian potentials that are still there and that are still, to quote her, that are still looking for new bodies to inhabit, new narratives to articulate them. So I'm not sure if I'm grounding the notion of Yugo-futurism, or probably I'm leaving it as abstract as it was, but this is just one example of how the whole process of working through a great deal of heritage, which we can't escape really, having grown up in this space, how this can maybe contribute to a perspective about the present and the future.
Maybe it's not a coincidence that they are talking about women histories, so histories of Anna's grandmother, Sonia, and yes, you put it really nicely in the end of the article, that they are affirming this, not only the heroic partisan team, but they're really affirming this everydayness of just, being kind of proud and just coping through things, and just that you go on in this kind of way. And this can also be hard. It's not that it's a heroic story always, and it's the way of narration is really important. By affirming also these little failures, little errors, little cracks that come to these grand narratives that I think that are a feminist way of putting a history into words, maybe. Maybe I would like to also ask Anna Fazekash, because she not that her text is only feminist, but maybe also affirming this kind of queerness, which is also something Jasmina Shubetaut brings up in her article. And maybe I would like to ask you, from this perspective, a question which goes like this. Is the future for us or for the ones that are coming after us? For whom is this future, maybe from this position that you're writing from? Because just to make a bit more of this context, you're really writing about, you have this notion that repeats itself, which is Pina Bausch's quote, if we don't dance, we're lost. So I think that these, ecstatic losers that you're talking about, the ecstasy that comes also with dance, and that Jasmina Shubetaut is actually speaking about when talking about Borgesia's videos with these ecstatic bodies, which are kind of bodies of resistance to this chrononormative time. Maybe yes, how would you, through this, maybe think about for whom the future is, for us or for somebody that is coming?
I'm not sure how to approach this question. I guess the thing is that two things that I really wanted to. I'm gonna approach this from like the rear end or something. The two things I really wanted to kind of avoid when approaching this topic was nostalgia and self-fetishization, and kind of giving into these cliches and stereotypes about who we are and how we're perceived from the outside. But also, I was kind of trying to avoid being overly optimistic and I don't know, like, I don't actually have like a fixed position on these things. At one point, I think I read something in the text about being quite indifferent towards the future, which was also an issue. But I think that for my work at least, but more broadly, it's important to kind of trace how we're feeling about what we're thinking about, how we're feeling, what we're processing on an emotional level when approaching a certain topic. And I was kind of surprised by the fact that I actually, on the one hand, I was interested in the historical perspective that defines what Eurofuturism could be. I was interested in getting in touch with a kind of like Yugoslav past or something. But at the same time, everything I found out, I would forget. Like it was just a knowledge that I would put somewhere and not look at, and then just it would go out of my mind. And so I didn't want to force it. I didn't want to also perform this kind of knowledge that I don't actually organically possess. But at the same time, I did use a lot of text, a lot of utopian narratives, fictions. I pulled out everything I could remember from a short phase when I was obsessed with feminist utopias and science fiction, and it was a really brief phase, so it's not a lot of material, but I pulled that all out, and I looked for scenes, I looked for segments that involved dance and bodies and movement, and I kind of like collaged all those things. But at the same time, I'm not like, I don't really feel very optimistic, or I can't really frame this kind of like utopian imagery actually in my living reality. I don't know who the future is for. I mean, I feel like also we're kind of doomed, but also, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, you know. Listening to the podcast I already mentioned, in which Kafka says there's hope but not for us, the author, Tony Wood, actually talks about there being a future, but one that won't include humanity, and that's just the way it is, and it's not a bad thing. Like the loss of human agency is only bad for humans, but we're not the whole universe, we're not the whole world. Things will survive, maybe we won't. The way we think about life may not be present, but there will be something. So, and why not think about this in terms of it being okay? I also recently interviewed Andrei Nicolaitis, who is a writer that keeps coming back obsessively to the topic of apocalypse. And he keeps saying, he writes these like really funny but really dark short novels about the apocalypse, but he keeps saying that he thinks about the apocalypse as a good thing, like it's a happy ending. The only problem is that it keeps not happening, you know? So, I don't know, I know I didn't really answer your question, but I can't really think in those terms about it. When I try to, these things leap out, you know.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe a question for Simon, because you also you interviewed Darko Suvin, and also Natalija is quoting him in her text, and he says that utopia is necessary for creation. But my question for you would be, how can this creation happen? Through theory or through fiction? Or both, or none of them? How is this relation between theory and fiction in creating utopias?
It's a really hard question. It's interesting because contributions in this issue are fiction. There's a lot of fictions and stories and so on. And as I said before, in the answers in the interview, they talked a lot about imagination. About we have to refurbish imagination, to use imagination that was part of Yugoslavia. But the problem, I think the main thing is story, the form of story. You have the different forms of the story. So one of the stories is also history. As you said, you have history facts, and you have fictional history references. As Tomislav Markovic said, the academia and the political elite, they tried in this new formed states on the ruins of ex-Yugoslavia, they tried to revive the past that never happened. So this is the point where where the story connects discourses about anything. Human nostalgia. Human nostalgia is not problematic because it's just a political grievance or sentiment of petit bourgeois. But the problem is that Yugoslavia is more needed by nationalists because they use Yugoslavia to make a story. So when they construct ethnical identities, they use our collective memory and they distorted this memory. So they make new stories. They make stories out of our legacy. I'm a little bit older, so I can say our legacy. So this is and the Suvin is maybe also naive in his own way. He says we just have to have the innovative future, or we have to radicalize imagination. But it's hard thing to do. You cannot just take imagination that was formed in some historical moment and just take it as Bompard did in his theater play, just to strip it of his historical dimensions. As I said, Yugoslavia has ended, so the future is the new story. We need a new story, maybe. I don't know. But just to talk, just to use terms, just to inflation of terms, just to talk about radicalized imagination, as Suvin puts it, I think it's maybe just it's not enough. How to say? Yeah.
So you would agree also with Moanis when he says that the Yugofuturism is only possible if we ban Yugoslavia and we start anew.
You cannot make a political program and use it to approach it in pragmatic way. You cannot use something that was operational in the 60s or 70s. Maybe we are trying. We have the urge to strip this feeling, effect of the 60s and 70s. But it's a question of politics. So maybe we should expand the South to the global South. Maybe these constructs even block the imagination. Maybe we should expand the territory, maybe to the global South, and the things that connect us are that we are on the in the dumpster of global capitalism. Maybe that's the radicalization of imagination.
Yeah, because exactly the Yugofuturism doesn't even have the word Yugoslavia in it. It has only the Yugo, which is the South. So
but
maybe this is
it's also interesting because this Yugo is not in the ex-Yugoslavia region. You cannot find Yugo. You have the basketball regional league, and it's called Adriatic League. It's not Yugo League. It's Adriatic League. It's Adriatic Sea. It's also the affective thing because we think of Adriatic Sea as something that connects us. But maybe South connects us. Maybe we are more connected to the, I don't know, Brasilia than to the bourgeois class of people that living in Beograd, Natalija.
Maybe Vera would like to ask you, maybe where are the places for these new communities? Is it the internet? Because internet was once like really this utopic place at the beginning of the internet where these communities could contribute like in this equal way, but then the internet became more and more privatized and so on, and really problematic in many ways. So I don't know, where are the places, the toposes of maybe these utopic new communities?
I have to say that I don't see Yugofuturism as utopic. Like for me, utopia is not a crucial part of this idea. For me, and as I said, like from the first time you called me and through the conference, and now when I read all these papers presented here, my ideas are changing. But for me, Yugofuturism is about finding an alternative between two discourses I think that we got stuck in thinking about Yugoslavia. And one is Yugo nostalgia with everything it brings, especially the criticism and the weight, the fact that it's so weighed down that nobody takes it seriously, any affirmative thoughts or feelings. And on the other side, this very aggressive need to erase Yugoslavia. This is what we see in our political systems. Teofil Pančić had this one really great sentence in his comment after Stježino Pozorje festival. He said, war has been declared on Yugoslavia today, a country that does not exist, but which must be killed until it is forgotten that it ever existed. And I think that we are moving in between these two discourses, and this is why when we hear the word Yugofuturism, we think about Yugostalgia. This is why when we think about Yugofuturism, I think we have this feeling of inadequacy of approaching it, because it's expected to just fit in one of these two discourses. And how I saw it is just Yugofuturism could be a possibility of some alternative, something which Maja Mađenović, she spoke about vitality. I think that maybe this is what I reacted to. And in this sense, I want to say that what's happening online is vital, but not in this very concrete, direct way that Yugofuturism calls for. Because Yugofuturism calls for some kind of creation, a new kind of creation about this very baggaged cultural memory space. But what we have online is reworking of everything. What we have online is just ordinary people who've been exposed to Smole narratives, now having the opportunity to express them, to copy them, to communicate them to others through many different means. And in this sense, internet or online communication or virtual communities is the possibility for many different things, but I think that it's not so much, it doesn't bring that big opportunity for very concrete or directed growth. It just, I think that in many ways, how we think about Yugoslavia has already changed. As Helga Novotny, an author who speaks about artificial intelligence, she says the future is now. We are living, last time we imagined the future was this, what we're living right now. So what's happening on the internet is in this sense very, very diverse and exciting.
Thanks a lot. I think that maybe we had these two rounds, as you may notice. Maybe we can have questions from the audience now before we're too tired to do that. If there are some, but please don't ask us what is Yugofuturism, because we may not know. Yes, please.
Hi everyone, thank you for your presentation. I'm Nadia, I'm a slide program coordinator of Bitef Festival, and I have a comment on the question. So I'm speaking as next generation. I'm 22 years old, so I was born in 2000 year, so I never felt Yugoslavia on my skin. And I think that's the problem for the term Yugofuturism, which I have, and that maybe my colleagues from the faculty of dramatic arts, artists, writers, and young people could have, because Vera said it nicely, we have two discourses of seeing Yugoslavia, and I think the only available discourse we have is a negative one, through media, through politics, through anything, and then my generation doesn't see nostalgia as connected to Yugoslavia. We just have some period of time, and it depends who told us something about it. My parents have good experience with Yugoslavia, but there are many parents of my colleagues and friends that do not have good experience. So my question is, how can we relate the term Yugofuturism, and how can we get it closer to a younger generation, even younger than me? So I don't know if I was clear, so...
Maybe from my perspective, because our generation actually, I'm born in 87, so I was really a young kid when Yugoslavia still existed, and also my colleagues are around that age. So we also didn't have this experience, but what I feel is that we really miss this regional networks, or we really miss something that was back then something completely obvious, and there was this common cultural space, and now we don't have that anymore. Everything narrowed down to these national states, and of course there were revisionisms of history. We didn't learn much about Yugoslavia even when I was going to school. There was only the history of Slovenia, whatever that was. So I think that maybe for me, Yugofuturism is also that, how we can relate again to one another. But maybe I don't know, I had this wish to do so, to broaden up this narrow context that are really becoming very suffocating. And also with the corona, it was even worse. We were all stuck in our flats, in our apartments, in our countries, and everything became really narrowed down. So for me, it's also about that. So not something that it was, but something that maybe can be again, or not again, or maybe anew, because we are not the same as the former generations were. So maybe this can be also something that even younger generations can relate to. I don't know if there's this urge to do so, but I think for us, for me, it is.
I just wanted to maybe add something. First off, I think that like in a lot of things, every generation has to dig, like just to, I don't know, as a woman, you have to possibly, dig in order to find predecessors, to find people who came before you and what they did and what they thought, because it's not something that's going to be given to you. So whatever part of your identity or your interest is not given to you, you are, like anyone, going to have to look into it. Secondly, I think that there is this problem of translation, because we talk about Yugofuturism, and what Simon mentioned, we lose sight of the fact that it's also a geographic term, it's a like geoculturological term, it doesn't have to relate to Yugoslavia. I'd actually be very interested in what you would think if you want to read the text in this publication and how you felt about it afterwards. One of the issues that I had was just that. I was born in 1990, so connecting to the topics of real life in Yugoslavia was just like not just something that I couldn't do, but something I didn't even want to do. And not because I think that there was, not because I have this or that relation to it, it just does not compute, it has nothing to do with me. I grew up watching Cartoon Network, and then I grew up watching MTV. I learned English on my own. Almost all of the references in this text, and I was wondering about that, but all of the references are English-speaking authors, because I genuinely feel more connected to that. Again, I didn't want to perform. So I understand where you're coming from, but just to make sure that you know that we're not that far from you. And also, you don't have to connect, It's also really fine. We don't have a definition of what Yugofuturism is. I don't think we want it. I don't think we're going to figure it out. I don't think anyone should. I think if we were to try, we would fuck it up again. So it would be better just to leave it open. And so I'm not, again, about the question like, who is it for? I don't know, whoever wants it. Like, who is the future for? Everyone is going to fight for themselves somehow. And yes, we want to connect, also very, very important point. What I felt writing this text was like a kind of community, like I belong to a generational kind of thing, although I didn't know the other people writing, but it felt good. And coming here feels good, and talking about it kind of feels good. And we don't even have to agree or understand each other well, but it's just an opportunity to try to think about this thing. Like, it's like we're all somehow related, but we've never met. So now you're like semi-interested in like, so who are you? Like, how do you think about these things? What do we have in common? So maybe that's something that someone among you or in the future generations will be interested in. It's also very fine if you're not. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Some other thoughts, maybe? From any one of you, any final thoughts? There's a performance to catch at 6. So I think that we will end our future here, but we will continue tomorrow. Tomorrow there's a conference on Yugofuturism. 4 great guests are talking about it, and I'll be very glad if you come tomorrow also, and we continue our discussions. The guests are, I'm sorry, I have to read it because I'm a bit, the guests, so that I don't leave out anyone. The guests are Vukan Markovic, Borislav Matic, Hanna Sirovica, and Mladen Alexiou. So tomorrow we start at 1 hour before at 2:30. If we won't be too long, about 2 hours. And yes, thank you everybody.